On Saturday, at my direction, the United States successfully concluded an airstrike in Kabul, Afghanistan, that killed the emir of al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri. After carefully considering the clear and convincing evidence of his location, I authorized a precision strike that would remove him from the battlefield once and for all. This mission was carefully planned, rigorously minimized the risk of harm to other civilians.
That was President Biden, still in COVID isolation, speaking from the White House last night. Joining us now, President on the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass. Richard, thanks for being with us this morning. Let's just start with the most basic. How significant is it that the U.S. killed al-Qaeda's leader, and what are the implications going forward?
Look, it's an important day. It disrupts one of the most important terrorist networks in the world. It's obviously a setback. It also sends an important message that the United States has enormous reach. We don't need to have on-the-ground presence. So all that's the good news. But the not-so-good news, or simply the reality, Jonathan, is that al-Qaeda, which is reconstituted in the past, will reconstitute again. Ultimately, Zawahiri will be replaced by someone else. Plus, there's any number of other terrorist groups, some self-supporting, some sponsored by governments. So it's a good day. It's anytime you take an individual like this off the battlefield, is obviously to be welcome. But it's not a decisive day. It's not a turning point.
It was almost exactly a year ago when the U.S. military withdrawal in Afghanistan began, leading to a lot of tumult and violence, a suicide bomb at the Kabul airport that killed 13 U.S. service members. And at the time, we heard from this administration that they were going to adopt to over-the-horizon sort of capabilities and intelligence there in the region. This seems to be a pretty effective demonstration of that. But give us your assessment right now as to whether that's going to be an effective policy for the U.S. going forward.
Well, you're exactly right. It worked on this occasion. The bad news is it won't necessarily work on other occasions. We won't necessarily get so-called actionable intelligence. And it's also a worrisome development because what it shows is the new Taliban looks pretty much, like the old Taliban. And the fact that al-Zawahiri was holding up in downtown Kabul shows you that the Taliban have not changed their stripes. So this is, again, it's an open-ended problem. I think we can't assume that we're always going to be able to act over the horizon from a distance with this kind of effectiveness. But it worked here. Hopefully, it'll work again in other specific situations. But again, this tool is not an all-purpose tool.
Yeah, certainly to your point, it's if the Taliban harboring this al-Qaeda leader in downtown Kabul, not in some mountainous region, speaks that they're certainly in open defiance of agreements made about not harboring terrorists. So where does the relationship look like with the Taliban going forward? How can the U.S. attempt to prevent something like this from happening again?
It's really tough. What you really want is a conditional relationship with the Taliban, which essentially would say, if you improve your performance against terrorism, if you improve your performance against drugs, if you improve your performance on human rights, we'll be more forthcoming. The problem is that's a lot of ifs, and it's not going to always work. Plus, the Taliban is still not a singular monolithic entity. We have to assume there's elements that are always going to have their own policies. So I don't think, again, this is something that's going to be resolved, Jonathan. I think 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, I assume the Taliban will likely still be in power, and we're going to have other days where we're not going to be able to turn to them as a partner against terrorism or against drugs or on human rights, but rather they're going to be an adversary.
So, Richard, stay with me for a second because I want to get you on one other story. The United States is pledging more military aid to Ukraine to help that country defend itself against Russian forces. The Biden administration yesterday announced it will send an additional $550 million in security assistance. This new package includes 75,000 rounds of artillery ammunition and more rounds for rocket launchers. So far, the U.S. has committed more than $8 billion in assistance to Ukraine since the war started. Meanwhile, Russia is repositioning its troops in Ukraine with an aim to strengthen its forces in the south, where Ukrainians have recently launched a pretty effective counteroffensive to win back some territories. According to a British Defense Ministry report obtained by the Wall Street Journal, Moscow is shifting forces from the front lines in the Donbas region to southern Ukrainian cities. The ministry also assessed that Russia is likely adjusting its Donbas offensive as it failed to make a decisive breakthrough since it launched its attack there a few months ago. So, Richard, what is this latest report from the British Defense Ministry, which has provided pretty accurate assessments of the state of play in this conflict? What does it tell you about where things stand?
It's actually fairly good news, not decisively good, but good. It shows the Russians still are not able to really put together effective offensive operations. They're good at mass, but the situation in the east is pretty much where it was, an old-fashioned war of attrition. Things are focusing on the south. Ukraine now has gotten some arms, has integrated them into its forces, surface-to-surface rockets, which pushes the Russians back. They've also eliminated a lot of the arms depot of the Russians. So I think we might see slow gains by Ukraine in the south. This is still an open-ended conflict here, Jonathan. But I think the general arrows right now seem to be heading in a better direction for Ukraine, contingent on them continuing to get the sort of weaponry they need.
Yeah, it does seem like the momentum has shifted over the last month or so. Richard Haass, we deeply appreciate it, and we will talk to you again in a few hours on Morning Joe.